The Hartford Convention was a secret convention held in Hartford, Connecticut. The convention began on December 15th, 1814, and ended on January 5th, 1815. Delegates from the Northern Federalist states came to the convention to discuss issues they were having, particularly with the War of 1812. The War of 1812 was a war fought between the United States of America and Great Britain. Although it is unclear what the war was fought over, many believe it was because of Britain violating United States maritime rights. American trade was also restricted to only the European continent. Another issue that could have possibly led to the outbreak of the war was the impressment of American sailors into the British Royal Navy. This means that the British were capturing American sailors and forcing them to join the British Navy. There were already tensions in Britain because of the Napoleonic War. In Britain, the War of 1812 is viewed as only a minor part of the Napoleonic Wars, but in America and Canada, it is viewed as its own war. The Federalists were the first American political group. The Federalist political group existed from 1790 to 1816. However, the beliefs of the group go back farther and still exist to this day. The Federalists controlled the government until 1801. The only Federalist president was John Adams. The colors of the Federalists were black and white. One of the main beliefs of the Federalists was a strong national government. The Federalists were also well funded. Their competitors were the Democratic Republicans, which were led by Thomas Jefferson. George Washington had Federalist beliefs, but was not affiliated with any political parties. The Federalists were never able to regain power after they lost the election in 1800. The party ended up splitting at one point because of negotiations with France. The Federalists were the supporters of the newly written Constitution. The Anti-Federalists were the ones against it, and they believed that the new Constitution would lead to corruption because of all of the power it granted the president. There were many Anti-Federalists in the new Western states and colonies. By 1817, the Federalist Party was practically dead. After the Federalist Party was gone, the Democratic Republicans adopted some of the Federalist ideology. There were many reasons that the Federalists opposed the War of 1812. Federalists, along with many other people, viewed the conflict as unnecessary. Many Federalists believed that the Republicans and James Madison were using the war to further their political interests instead of doing what would benefit the country. Federalists opposed the war in general. In the House of Representatives and Senate, Federalists voted against war-related measures 90% of the time. The Federalists also opposed the Republican ideas of invading Canada. Federalists believed that the nation's real enemy was Napoleon Bonaparte, who at the time was taking over the French government. Federalists believed that the War of 1812 would do more harm than good.
Madison thought that the main political problem was the opposition to the war in New England. New England opposed the war as they had opposed all of the commercial restrictions that had gone on for 5 or 10 years because they were especially harmful to it economically.
Congressmen from New England and members of the opposition Federalist Party argued that this war would threaten their seaport-based livelihood. They accused the president of embroiling the U.S. in a pointless and costly conflict. Despite the chaos that grips Washington, on June 18, 1812, Congress acts on the president's request. Every Federalist casts a nay vote, but Mr. Madison gets his war. For many, it still remains an unpopular cause. Days later, demonstrators clash in the streets of Baltimore. Dozens are killed or injured. But for Madison, there is no turning back. He realizes the issue of impressment is just the beginning of what could be a reconquest of the young nation. The decision to go to war is a battle for the soul of America itself.
The Hartford Convention was held for many reasons. The War of 1812 was very unpopular. It was unpopular in the New England states especially. The New England states decided something had to be done about this war. They felt that their commercial interests were being sacrificed for the war. The New England shipping industry was being devastated by the war, and many people were losing their jobs. The Hartford Convention was to be held in Hartford, Connecticut, to discuss the interests of New England. All of the New England states were invited to the convention, and the convention was held in secret in 1814. The Hartford Convention began on December 15th, 1814, and ended on January 15th, 1815. During the convention, the New England states discussed the constitutional aspects of the war. All of the states that are a part of New England were invited to the convention. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut sent delegates. A few counties from Vermont and New Hampshire sent delegates, even though the whole states did not want to participate. There were 26 delegates at the meeting. About half of them were from Massachusetts. They discussed what they were going to do about the War of 1812. They ended up making a list of demands to take to Washington.
In fairness to them, the war was not in their interests as they understood it and as they experienced it, and they were pretty vocal about it. And eventually, that opposition culminates in a meeting of a body called the Hartford Convention, which met in Hartford Convention late in 1814. Ostensibly, the purpose of the Hartford Convention was to try and pressure the federal government to provide better defence for New England, which New Englanders did not think the federal government was doing a very good job of by that stage in 1814, and to do something more about getting New England tax money to pay for the defence of New England, that sort of thing. But the Republicans suspected that this was really a secessionist plot, and that what the Federalists in the Hartford Convention would do would either secede from the Union or make some sort of arrangement with the British which would actually declare New England neutral in this war, of which they wanted no part. Now, none of that actually came to pass, and even to this day, historians have not been entirely clear what the Hartford Convention was about, because they were very careful not to leave a significant paper trail.
The Federalists created demands during the Hartford Convention that they were planning on taking to Washington, D.C. However, while they were planning on doing this, a ship was sailing across the Atlantic with news that a peace treaty had been signed and the war was coming to a close. The representatives did not make it to Washington, D.C. before the ship and news of the war's end had spread. This made the Federalists seem traitorous for not supporting the war. After the Hartford Convention was made public, there were many consequences for the Federalists. In the convention, there was talk about the northern states seceding from the United States. This resulted in the Federalists being seen as traitorous for wanting to secede from the Union. The Hartford Convention going public was fatal for the Federalist Party and lost all popularity after it happened. The war ended after a treaty was signed. The treaty is known as the Treaty of Ghent. The treaty stated that all conquered land should be given back to America. The boundaries of the United States and Canada would also be defined as a result of the treaty. Both Americans and British signed the treaty on December 24, 1814, in the city of Ghent, Belgium. The news of the treaty did not get to America for months, and while the news was on its way, American forces under Andrew Jackson won the Battle of New Orleans. This made for more people backing the war and less support for the Federalists. The treaty was fully put in effect on February 17, 1815.